I just finished my 18th book, The Wideness of the Sea: How to Be Evangelical and Gay-Affirming. This one took me a while to write, and I'm going to talk about that in a moment. But first, I've been thinking about this topic for a while. In fact, it was back in September 1999 at a wine and cheese reception sponsored by the Anglican Church in England when my wife and I had just moved there. And I met a young lady at that time who was gay affirming, as we would today call it. And that was an absolute shock to me because I didn't realize there were Christians who had that view. A few months after that, my wife was working at Waterstone's bookstore on Gower Street in London, England. And one of the people that she worked with, his name was Mark, and he was gay and he was a Catholic. And in that way, I began to have my paradigm being challenged. A year after that, in the year 2000, I read an essay by evangelical ethicist Lewis Smedes called Like the Wideness of the Sea. And that essay, published in a journal, I believe called Perspectives, was a shock to me because here was an evangelical ethicist arguing for inclusion of gay couples within the church in the same way that we would include couples who had been divorced and remarried for a reason other than porneia, which appeared to be a breach of the teaching of Jesus. And the point that Smedes made in that essay was what changed the church to include couples who had been divorced and remarried was not new exegesis, new interpretation of the very words of Jesus in Mark 10 and Matthew 19. Rather, it was the experience of the pastoral challenge of finding a way to redemptively welcome couples who have been divorced and remarried in a broken world. And Smedes argued that we should extend that same grace to same sex couples. And for an evangelical ethicist to argue that in the year 1999, that was pretty shocking. So that really got me thinking. A few years later, in 2005, I was teaching a seminary ethics class, and there was a documentary that had come out a year or two before by a Jewish director called Trembling Before God, which told the story of Jews who want to be pious, but who are also gay and struggling with that journey. And I contacted the film director and got his permission to show that documentary to my ethics class at an evangelical seminary. And he thought that was pretty amazing. And for myself, I was continuing to think and be challenged on these issues. I'm not sure when exactly I myself became gay affirming as an evangelical, but certainly I was by the year 2014, 15, which is right around probably a couple years after that, actually, probably about 2017, when David Gushie's third edition of his book, Changing Our Mind, came out. And I heard him speak at the American Academy of Religion. And that was, again, very transformative. Anyway, so shortly after that, probably about 2019, I began writing my own book on this topic, knowing that I was teaching at an evangelical seminary where the reality is you could get into trouble publishing on something like that. But I've never been one to shy away from a challenge or to chase in my prophetic witness because I believe that might potentially put me at some degree of risk. So I was working on the book, and the reality is it just didn't gel. The same thing happened, by the way, with my book, Jesus Loves Canaanites. I started my original book on that topic in about the year 2012, and I pitched it to Oxford University Press, where I'd already published a book. And one of the readers at Oxford approved the book for publication from based on the proposal, which was about 70 pages of text. The other reader did not approve of it. And in fact, he had some, or she, I don't know, he or she had some very caustic things to say about me personally, because in the book, I argued that you could maintain a concept of divine authorial inerrancy while still recognizing the morally problematic witness of the biblical text with respect to things like divinely commanded genocide. I don't think that reader ever really got what I was doing and that they were triggered by the use of the term inerrancy in the book. Anyway, Oxford can't go ahead and give you a contract if you only have one of two readers approving, so that killed that project. But close to 10 years later, I ended up writing the very book that I started 10 years earlier, and that was the right time. I finished that book within 3 months in 2021, and that was like waiting for the fruit to ripen on the vine, and then you can just pick it. It just comes together. And it's the same experience with writing this book. I wasn't ready to write it back in 2020, 2019, just didn't come together. It did come together over the last 6 months or so that I've been working rather intensively on it. So I'm very excited about this book and looking forward to what can be done with it and how it can make a difference. Here's one fascinating fact I talk about early in the book. Believe it or not, approximately 40% of white evangelicals would qualify as, in some respect, gay affirming. 40%. That's an extraordinarily high minority, large minority. It's approximately close to 18 million people in the US alone. The challenge is that this very large minority do not feel safe to speak out their convictions. So they are left alone. They're not typically in psychologically safe communities. Your typical evangelical church is definitely not psychologically safe, and you're not free to share your own beliefs, questions, convictions if they diverge from mainstream opinion, particularly on highly contested topics like this one. My hope and prayer for this book, The Wideness of the Sea, is that it is going to redefine the dialogue. It is going to show how you, in fact, can be gay affirming and evangelical. And it's going to do it rigorously over about 200 pages. Typesetting's not complete yet, so I don't know exactly how many pages it'll be, but it's about 48,000 words. If the church wants to be a church of truth and light, you need to be able to welcome everybody's opinion and not be threatened by them and not have people out of fear remain silent. So my hope is that this book can bring about that change. So stay tuned. The Wideness of the Sea is coming soon to Amazon.com and all of its affiliates. Realistically, you're not going to find this book in a bookstore. It's just the way it is today. But please do get your own copy and let other people know about it.